Malibuca and Merstach just pulled off their first FNCS win together, becoming the best duo in Europe. But the journey to get here wasn't an easy one. So today, we're going to take a look back to see exactly how they got here. First, let's start with Merstach. He was born on March 27th, 2007 in Latvia. Growing up, he was just like every other kid, and early on found a love for video games. And before he was even a teenager, the hit battle royale Fortnite started taking over. Now, I'm not 100% sure when he started playing, but it was definitely very early on, considering he competed in the first online tournaments Epic hosted back in February of 2019, which were the Division Cups. Now, even though he started competing then, he wouldn't take things too seriously until the announcement of the Fortnite World Cup. Just like many other players, this would be the start of Merstach's love for competitive. However, his pop-off wouldn't happen quite yet. Throughout the qualifier weeks, he plays pretty poorly, except for Week 8 duos when he was able to get his first earnings after placing top 900. Now, like I just said, this would start his passion for the game. However, things wouldn't go too well for him for over an entire year. I say this because in the first Season X FNCS, he was able to make some earnings again. However, throughout Chapter 2, Season 1, 2, 3, and 4, Merstach didn't make a single penny. At this point in a player's career, most people would just quit and give up. But if you want to become an FNCS champion, you can't quit. So that's what Merstach would do, continuing to push through, learning from his mistakes. And little did he know, this would all pay off in that very next season. He started off strong, getting his first earnings in over 15 months during the Frosty Frenzy, then placing in 2 separate solo cash cups. Because of this, he was able to find better teammates going into Chapter 2 Season 5 Trio FNCS. During the qualifiers, they didn't perform the best, only able to make a round 3 in the second and third week. But most importantly, they just barely did good enough to make the heats, where if they placed top 8, Merstach would make his first ever grand finals. And long story short, they were able to pull off an impressive top 6, officially qualifying them to the finals. Now in the end, they'd only managed to get 23rd, but considering they were contested and this was their first grands, it's not too shabby. Even though he had just made his first grands, Season 6 wouldn't go so well. First off, he ended up switching trios after week 2 of FNCS, resulting in him not even making the heats. But this season was also extremely important because it would be the first time he would play with Malibuca. By the way, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe because only 5% of you watching actually are, so double check. So after a disappointing Season 6, Season 7 was only up from here. Starting off, he would end up finishing in second place during the UEFA Cup, bringing home $5,000. And only 1 month later, he would win a DreamHack Cash Cup Extra with Malibuca. This streak and popping off would only continue, with him consistently earning in almost every event for the first time in his career. This would also be the very first time Malibuca and Merstach would officially team up for FNCS. But before we get into that, let's go back to see how Malibuca got here. He was born on October 15th, 2005 in Russia. Malibuca started playing the game back in Season 3 of Chapter 1, and just like many other players back then, he was just playing for the love of the game, and had no idea one day he would become one of the best players the game has ever seen. He continued to play just for fun, not taking the game too seriously, and then the World Cup was announced, and in solos week 9, he would end up making his very first earnings. But just like Merstach, he wouldn't pop off quite yet. Malibuca would make some more earnings in Winter Royale, however, his placements would only get worse throughout the next few months. But again, just like Merstach, during this time, he was learning from his mistakes, slowly getting better, until eventually, in Chapter 2, Season 3, he would make the solo DreamHack Finals, breaking the streak of bad performances. Now, he didn't do the best in finals, getting a 98th, but still, he used this as a boost in confidence and learning experience. And luckily for him, that same season was the very first solo FNCS, so it was time to see if he could continue that streak. But it's worth noting, up until this point, Malibuca played pretty poorly throughout FNCS, but this time he was able to make some money in the third qualifier and eventually make it to his first ever heats. Unfortunately though, just like DreamHack, he didn't do the best, finishing in 98th. Nonetheless, this was still a massive improvement from the prior seasons. Going into Season 4, you would think this momentum would continue, however, that wouldn't happen. FNCS this time was switched over to trios, and throughout the separate qualifying weeks, he didn't make it out of opens a single time. This was a huge blow to his confidence, but still, he wouldn't let this affect him. And quickly, that proved true. He started to earn more consistently, even bringing home over $2,000 from the Frosty Frenzy. Heading into FNCS this time, he had regained that confidence, and it showed, with him playing extremely well in the qualifiers, resulting in him making the heats. Plus, he'd also get a 3rd place in a Trio Cash Cup during that time. Malibuca was looking the best he's ever been, and with a solid trio by his side, it was looking like he would make his first ever Grand Finals. What do you know, during the heats, he would dominate, winning the entire thing, officially making it it to his first ever grand finals. But sadly in the end for him, they would get contested, yet they still would do pretty good considering getting 19th overall. This was huge for Malibuca, finally putting him on the map. However, season 6 would end in tragedy. They were playing even better now than that last season throughout the open qualifiers, but when it came time to the heats, they just barely missed out, getting 9th. And in the reboot round, they got so close but just weren't able to make it. This now brings us to season 7, but because he ended up doing decent in the season 5 grands, he qualified for the FNCS Solo All-Star Showdown. Now, considering he was going up against 100 of EU's best players after only making one singular grand finals ever, he managed to do pretty good for himself, ending in 46th, earning himself an extra $4,000, so not bad at all. But we're now at the point where he would finally play with Merstach for the first time. So let's pick things back up from there. Even though this was their first time playing together, they already had insane chemistry, and in FNCS they would prove that, having an amazing performance during the opens, then in the heats getting a 5th, qualifying them for their first grands together. But if you guys remember, during this time, Malibuca and Merstach were starting to become one of the most hated players in the game for just one reason: they decided to drop at Steamy Stacks. For those of you who don't remember, this was also the drop spot of one of EU's favorite players, Mr. Savage. So to say they started getting a lot of hate would be a massive understatement. As most of you know, it's very hard to do well in FNCS while being contested, so with that being said, in the end they would get 28th. Even though they obviously wanted to do better, they knew this trio had potential to be great. So going into season 8, they decided to stick together, and nobody would have guessed what would have happened next. Early on in that season, Malibuca and Merstach would end up getting a 3rd in the Duo DreamHack Finals, and as far as FNCS goes, they went on to win Qualifier 2, solidifying their spot in Grands. But like I just said, in that prior season, Mr. Savage was also dropping at the same spot. But this time, it wasn't just Savage. He would end up dropping Ref's guard for Benji Fishy, another fan favorite. So with them going up against two of the biggest names in the game, it wasn't going to be easy. Not just because of the hate they'd get, but also they're phenomenal players. Yet despite these circumstances, like I keep on saying, Merstach and Malibuca didn't let this affect them, proceeding to go on to place 7th overall, earning $25,000 each, proving to all of those haters that they are good players and not just landing there to grief them. Even though FNCS was over for that season, there was actually still another one, that being the FNCS Grand Royale with a massive prize pool. So going to the finals for that event, nobody knew what to expect, since once again they'd be conning Savage and Benji. And well, long story short, this time around they would end up getting 27th while Benji's trio got 15th. But going into next season, everything was about to change, because we were now heading into Chapter 3, and with that came a switch in FNCS game modes from trios to duos. So with them playing so well in past duo events, you already know they had to run it for this chapter. And this would spark the beginning of one of the greatest duos we've ever seen in Fortnite. Season 1 went pretty well for them. They both had multiple top 3s in duo and solo cash cups, and in FNCS they'd place 15th. But soon after, something would happen that would almost stop Malibuca's career entirely. It was March of 2022, and the Russia versus Ukraine war was starting to get out of control. Because of this, the US would place sanctions on Russia. And since Epic Games is a US based company, that meant they were not able to pay out anybody who lived in Russia. So at 16, Malibuca had to make an extremely hard decision. Either stay with his family in Russia and most likely retire the dreams of becoming a pro, or move to a completely different country for the first time in his life in the hopes that he would continue competing. And well, after much debate, he would go with option 2. In the hopes to keep his competitive career alive, Malibuca and his older brother would move to Serbia in order to compete and be eligible to earn prize money. But by the time he was able to sort everything out, Season 2's FNCS was already here. And even though he was dealing with all this in the background, so far this season was going extremely good for him. Leading up to FNCS, Merstach and Malibuca managed to get second in 3 separate solo cash cups. Then in the first qualifier of FNCS, they pulled off a win, automatically qualifying them to the grand finals once again. But this time, they would have their greatest performance yet, placing 4th in grands despite being contested by Pink and Anas. Now they were starting to cement themselves as possibly some of the best players in the world, but they would still have to prove it. And in Season 3's FNCS, they do just that. But first, Malibuca had to pop off. In July of 2022, Gamers8 hosted the very first Fortnite LAN since COVID started, and with an over $1 million prize pool, all of the top pros were invited to compete. one of those being Epic Whale. At the time, Epic wanted to play with other pros, but plans didn't come through. So eventually he would ask Malibuca, and of course he said yes. Nobody knew how this duo would perform, since they were from very different regions and never played a single tournament together. But when it finally came time to play, they would make history.
Say that it's actually not there up above, but Epic Whale ends up going down. It's Malibuca gonna be able to pick that up into speed 2 here. Will he be able to hold on? Oh, and oh my gosh, the elimination comes through, but it's not gonna be enough.
Yeah,
You guys fight down below. We'll grab the elims, but massive refresh like that. Down he goes. They have the heals to stay alive. They got Tayson out.
nice, bro. Let's go, bro. Yeah,
Stay with him all the way up, and a different team.
Match the power of Malibuca and Epic Will.
I don't know, what's up, Ben?
Somehow, Malibuca and Epic Whale would do it, winning $250,000. He couldn't have been more ready going into FNCS. And on top of just winning Gamers 8, him and Merstach were doing amazing in almost every single Cash Cup. So in the finals of the first qualifier of FNCS, when they'd place 4th, automatically making it to Grands again, nobody was shocked. But this time, they'd almost end up winning, just barely falling short by a few points, ending in 2nd place overall, taking home $100,000 each. So far, Chapter 3 has been insane for them. Just a year ago, they were essentially nobodies, just trying to prove themselves. Also, remember back in Chapter 2 when they were getting tons of hate for contesting Benji and Savage? Well, all those haters had now turned into fans. Everybody was rooting for them, and things would only continue to improve for them. In Season 4, they would get the opportunity of a lifetime. This time around, there was no Opens FNCS, but instead, the first official Epic hosted LAN event since the World Cup, the FNCS Invitationals. So since they had been playing extremely good, they were obviously invited. But to make a long story short, they ended up landing at a POI contested by them, Tayson and Chapix, and Aqua and Razon. Even going up against some of the best players in the game, they were still able to come out with an impressive 15th place. But after this, to everybody's surprise, Malibuca and Merstach would split up, with Malibuca now playing with Thomas HD and Merstach with Tayson. So heading into Chapter 4, everyone was curious to see how things would turn out, but nobody could have predicted how things would end. For the first season, let's bring our focus back on Merstach. Him and Tayson seemed to be working pretty well as a duo. In the qualifiers for FNCS, they'd get 5th, 4th, and 29th in the finals, unsurprisingly qualifying straight to Grands. They also came through with a 2nd and 3rd place in the Elite Cup finals right before it started, so it's safe to say they were looking pretty good. Switching back over to Malibuca, he was also looking outstanding, winning 3 Elite finals, a solo Victory Cup finals, and a solo late game cup. In FNCS, they weren't able to get any top 10s throughout the qualifiers, however they did do more than good enough to make it straight to the Grands. So now, after preparing for months, it was time for the Grand Finals, and nobody could have predicted what the outcome would be. The final moments of FNCS, it came down to Malibuca and Tayson as solos, each in 1st and 2nd place respectfully, to see who would win. Nobody knew what the outcome would be, so when it came time to announce the winner, everybody was on the edge of their seats.
On the leaderboard, and now we can reveal there's just 1 point between it, and your champions have made it #1, Merstach and Tayson.
Merstach and Tayson would win FNCS by just 1 singular point, just barely beating out his old teammate Malibuca. This win didn't just mean that he was now an FNCS champ, it would also qualify him to compete at the $4 million global championship at the end of this chapter. In the next seasons after this win, Merstach would only really go downhill. But in Season 2, they were able to go absolutely crazy again, placing 2nd right behind Queasy and Vino, who had won 6 out of the 12 games, which would be almost impossible impossible to beat. But in Season 3, they would place 15th, then in the Global Championship, another 15th. Not bad to an average player, but this is Tayson and Merstach. They want to do much better. And for Malibuca, it would go somewhat the same. In Season 2, they would get contested, yet still manage to pull off a 3rd place. Then Season 3 and 11th while being uncontested. Lastly, in the Global Championship, they would end up dropping at that same spot they had been for seasons. However, this time, Kanata and Agers would contest them, and they dominate them off spawn, resulting in Malibuca and Thomas HD finishing on 39th. With the end of Chapter 4 not going well for either Merstach or Malibuca, they would split from their duos. This would spark some rumors of them possibly reuniting, but nobody knew for sure, until Chapter 5 would release and they'd officially announce that the OG duo was back once again. So now it was time to see if they really had what it took after not playing together for an entire year. Malibuca and Merstach would start off strong, getting a 2nd place in the first Duo Cash Cup, but in the rest of them leading up to FNCS, there were no notable performances. We were now at the event everybody had been waiting for, and with only 2 open qualifiers this time around, it would be interesting to see how the top teams would perform. For Malibuca and Merstach though, it was a breeze, finishing in 7th and 42nd. This meant that they qualified to the upper bracket semifinals, where if they won a single game, they'd make it straight to the grands. In the first 3 games of the semifinals, they were looking extremely good, but weren't able to get that win quite yet. However, game 4, something crazy would happen. Off spawn, Merstach would go down, leaving Malibuca as a solo for the rest of the game, until later on he somehow got the reboot off. They then proceeded to get some refreshes and eventually win the game, going straight to the grand finals. An absolutely insane reboot clutch. Now things were looking really good up until this point, but heading into the finals, it wasn't looking good for them. That's because they were dropping at Fencing Fields, attempting to play for the Mythic AR and Medallion. However, they weren't alone. 2 other teams had that exact same idea, so that meant there would be 3 separate teams landing at that one POI. With the odds against them, it was finally time to see if they could make the impossible possible. In game 1, they would play very well, getting a 2-kill 10th, a very solid performance for the first match. However, the following 2 games didn't go so well, with them going down in 29th and 26th place. But hope wasn't lost quite yet when in game 4, they would make an insane comeback.
Дал 30.
На это. Подумай. Они забрали. Через них.
Дал садру.
Окей.
Нами.
Да.
Тут стал слева от тебя. Идёшь?
Пока. Сейчас бело.
Стригай.
Да, посмотрим.
Здесь резов нету. Меня скинули. Да, нокнул. Нокнул, боксился. У меня 3 аптеки. Найс, хорош. Nice.
An 8-kill second was exactly what they needed, jumping up from 28th place to now 8th. With only 2 games left of day 1 though, they needed to stay consistent if they wanted a good shot at winning. So with that in mind, it was time to see what they could do in match number 5.
Убил. Нокнул.
Убил.
Найс. На кону зачел. Убил.
Чекай, ЛГ.
Взрослый.
Выбирай.
Сейчас
Сломал.
Скинул. Дал час.
На кракнули.
Убил.
Я тебя чапнул.
Фотку.
Смотри.
Убил. Я умер
Найс.
на зоне и на моей карте. Нормально, покер.
Malibuca and Merstach would once again have an insane game, getting a 10-kill second, bumping them up into 2nd place, only 22 points behind 1st. Unfortunately though, in the last game of day 1, they would slip up, going down in 20th with 4 kills. But when all was said and done, they were still in 3rd place, this time only 38 points behind 1st. And with the leaderboard being so close, anybody could still take home that win. Heading into day 2, things were about to heat up. I already mentioned how the leaderboard was extremely close, but that wasn't it. Epic decided to change the format and give 1.5 times more points than day 1, meaning the win was now 100 points instead of 65, and kills were now 6 instead of 4. This could really spice up that leaderboard, giving pretty much anybody within the top 25 a chance to come back and win it all. So that meant heading into day 2, they needed to make sure they had a good performance. They would not disappoint.
Убил.
Убил? Вижу.
Да, убил.
Законсу. Белый.
Убил. На мне чел.
Да.
Бокс.
Давай, садка.
Сзади.
In the first 3 games, they get a 7th and 2 8ths, each having a good amount of kills. This now puts them in first place with only 3 matches remaining, but this is where a disaster would strike. Game 10, they'd go down in 15th, and Game 11, a 20th. That meant they had now dropped into second place, just 2 points away from first, who were Queasy and Thomas HD. Both teams were playing so consistently that it really seemed like they were the only 2 competitors that could win. With nerves being higher than ever, it was now time for the final game to see who will become the EU FNCS champion. But nobody could have predicted that this would end up being the closest grand finals we will probably ever see. All spawn, Queasy and Thomas were able to pick up an elimination. Malibuca and Merstach, on the other hand, made it out of fencing fields with a medallion safely, but then they'd get into an altercation, resulting in them having to use a lot of materials and heals. Heading into the mid game, they were able to get their loot back, and both teams were looking extremely good, except for one crucial aspect. Malibuca and Merstach had a bunch of surge, where Queasy and Thomas weren't above by much. And eventually, they'd fall under that threshold, resulting in them having to take some risky peeks in order to get that damage. They kept looking and looking, but weren't able to get anything, resulting in them having to use most of their heals. This was looking extremely bad for them, until Thomas HD did this.
As now Grapple Blade's forced, the snipe, it's hit by Thomas HD to the damage they need, and it looks like they're gonna do it aggressively.
It's right now, it's almost an all or nothing situation, but Queasy's dropped. Phaser's able to get the knock. He's trying to save the day. Get the knock back onto Phaser. This is everything for Queasy and Thomas. King is getting backed up little by little.
Somehow, Thomas got the res, and now they were above the surge threshold. Checking back in on Merstach and Malibuca, they were able to pick up an extra elimination. And now we're in an extremely good spot to possibly win. However, Thomas and Queasy were looking the complete opposite. While rotating, they would drop below surge, eventually resulting in Queasy going down. And shortly after, Thomas would pick up another elimination, but still eventually go down. It was looking like there was no way Malibuca and Merstach could lose. All they needed to do was just survive a little bit longer to make sure they got those couple of points in order to take over the lead. But then this would happen.
Я пока тут зачинил. У меня чел, я умер.
Malibuca would go down, leaving Merstach as a solo. So now, all we could do was sit back and see if he could pull off the clutch to win FNCS.
He's been in this situation before 1 year ago, and he was on the victory end along with Tayson of a close race. But now it's going to be put to the test yet again. He's under pressure, getting shot from different angles, 83 HP. He's well above the damage threshold, and he still finds a way to stay alive. Even dodging zone along the way, but he goes down.
It was looking good, but Merstach would go down shortly after. Just like back in Chapter 4 Season 1, nobody knew who would actually win. So once again, all we could do was wait for the leaderboard to update. They had done it, Malibuca winning his first FNCS and Merstach with his second, just barely beating out Thomas and Queasy by 1 singular point, officially cementing them as one of Fortnite's greatest duos to touch this game. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. We're trying to hit 100k by the end of the year. Also, if you're looking for a fun creative game to play with your friends, check out my new map, Tile Wars. I'm sure you'll all love it. But with that being said, I hope you all have an amazing rest of your days. Peace out.